Hey there, it's Rob from the Facebook Myocardial Bridge Support Group, and this video is about the myth that stents and bypasses are a good solution to myocardial bridges. And before we get to the myth, uh, the reality, the truth, is that the number one first line treatment that's widely agreed for myocardial bridges is unroofing surgery. Unroofing surgery is the only surgery that actually removes the myocardial bridge. Right? It's when you take the band of muscle that's squashing the artery and you literally remove that band of muscle, so it doesn't exist anymore. So just off the bat, stents and bypasses are already sort of suboptimal solutions because they're not actually removing the root of the problem. They're not actually moving the bridge. You still have the myocardial bridge with those. So let's start with a stent. What's wrong with a stent? At least three things are reasons not to put a stent in. At least three. One is that a stent is a stent is something that's like a hard, metal or metallic type substance, a mesh that's kind of a mesh tube that goes inside of the artery and supposed to keep it open. But normally that would work because if you didn't have a myocardial bridge, if you had a normal artery that just had some plaque or something like that, no big deal. Just keep the stent in there and then it props the artery open. The difference is when you have a myocardial bridge, it's a whole different ball game because that artery is under compression, right? It's like remember there's it's like stepping on a garden hose for every heartbeat, right? That bridge on top is squashing the artery every heartbeat. So now you're squashing the artery that has a stent in it, right? So you could squash the stent and the stent can break. Okay, so the breaking of the stent is a possibility. It makes it very dangerous. And if it breaks and gets stuck in your artery, you can die. Okay, so that's just sort of a simple reason right off the bat forget stents. Okay, so no one's recommending, no major hospital with expertise in myocardial bridges, no one who's researched this for a long time is recommending stents. If someone who's a doctor is recommending a stent for you for your myocardial bridges, they're basically telling you that they're completely out of the loop of all the major consensus in medicine for the last, I don't know, decades on myocardial bridges because none of these big hospitals are writing papers recommending stents. So now there's a couple there's an objection to that, or there's like a caveat to that, you might say, which is now some people are saying, um, a few people are saying in medicine, oh, the problem was breakability. Okay, so now they have these new types of stents, which are like unbreakable, and I forget what they're made of, titanium or plutonium, whatever they're making the stents out of, and they say, well, that solved the problem. They're unbreakable, so we don't have to worry about the stent breaking. So they conclude, oh, now we can use stents in myocardial bridges. It sounds good unless you realize that there's additional reasons to not put a stent in the bridges, and that the unbreakable stent doesn't solve the additional problems. So here's the additional problem. One is, according to Dr. Gusta Pettersson, who is the uh, main lead surgeon, he's done many of these unroofings at Cleveland Clinic, okay, which is one of the top heart hospitals in the world. He says in a video, which I'll also post below in the comments toward the end of the video, with Dr. Joanna Gobriel, who's the cardiologist on the myocardial bridge team there. He says when you put a stent in a myocardial bridge, not only could it break and you die, but it removes the possibility that you could ever unroof that artery. I don't know the physics of that, why that is exactly, but that's what he said multiple times in that video. Okay, that once you put a stent in an artery like that in the myocardial bridge, you can't unroof that artery later. So you're stuck. Basically, when you put the stent in, you're stuck with the myocardial bridge for life, basically. Because also, just so you know, if you don't know already, you cannot remove stents. What happens when you put stents in any artery, not just myocardial bridged arteries? A stent actually, the mesh goes inside the artery, but then it like becomes part of the artery wall. It like blends in and the flesh of the artery wall grows around the stent, so the stent goes into the artery wall. Okay, so this doctor, the surgeon, is saying you cannot be unroofed after you put in a stent. And also, we know that you cannot remove a stent. So you're stuck with that myocardial bridge for life, and you're also stuck with the stent for life too. Okay, so that's not a good option. So as he says in that video, if you do that, then your only option left is bypass. And as we'll see in a second, bypasses often fail. So that's not a good option either. Okay, so that's two reasons not to put in a stent. A, they could break and kill you with the compression of the myocardial bridge, stepping on a garden hose. And B, even if you said, okay, well, I have an unbreakable stent made of, kryptonite or whatever it is, then it's still not a good reason to put in a stent, because then you'll never be able to be unroofed. But there's a third reason not to put in a stent. And this is a very, very important reason. If you just think about the physics of it, okay, you're at the myocardial bridge compressing the artery every heartbeat. Boom, boom, boom. Now, Stanford says that aside from even stents, just on its own, having that myocardial bridge compressing on your artery every heartbeat, they think that that's the cause of endothelial dysfunction and vasospasms. It's the really bad symptoms people have. You're having heart pain and you're having, this kind of shaking and stuff like that comes with vasospasms. Your artery literally goes into a spasm. It's not going to give oxygen. So that's all they believe at Stanford, caused by the pounding of the myocardial bridge compressing on the artery, even without a stent inside. Okay, so in that case, it's like you're stepping on the garden hose. There's nothing in the garden hose except blood, so at least it's soft inside. And even that causes endothelial dysfunction and vasospasms. Now add a stent in there, something hard, okay, inside of that artery. So now you're stepping on the hose, but there's this big metal mesh thing in there. Now you're basically sandwiching the flesh, the tissue of the artery wall, right, the garden hose itself. You're sandwiching that between the muscle band on top that's squashing down like the foot stepping on the hose, and then the mesh of the hard stuff of the stent inside. And so really you're basically slamming a piece of tissue of the artery wall into something hard every single heartbeat. Okay, I think we can see how that could go very bad. So what could happen there is that you could just keep doing that long enough. You're going to you're squashing flesh between hard stent and bridge, and you can wear away on that artery. The artery could rupture, to dissect. And if you look at the myocardial bridge charts of the pictures of how bad it could get, usually the last one is called dissection, which is the artery splits open, because it's been pounded on so hard for so long. So you're just basically amplifying the friction every single time that artery gets pounded on by that bridge, and it only stands to increase the chances of that artery rupturing and dissection. All of a sudden, blood, is you have a big hole in your artery, blood's going everywhere. So that will be potentially life-threatening. Okay, so those are three reasons. Any one of them, is a reason not to do a stent. But altogether, A, stent could break, you could die. B, you can never be unroofed after that. You can't remove that stent ever. And C, artery, it increases the likelihood the artery could basically get worn down and sort of eroded, and you have things like that due to the pounding of the bridge into the stent with the sandwiching of the artery between. Okay, so don't ever put a stent in your artery. Just for perspective, on our website, we have almost 2,000 people on our website. Lots of people with myocardial bridges. And there's only 2 that I know of on the website who had doctors put in stents. Both of them are not doing well. Both of them are considering suing for malpractice. At least one, possibly both, are considering a heart transplant. Okay, so that's where it goes. When you put a stent in, that's what happens, stuff like that. Okay, so don't do it. It's a terrible idea. And don't ever let a doctor convince you to put a stent in the myocardial bridge. So the second part is the bypass. The bypass is not, again, it's only like a last resort if for some reason unroofing is impossible. And before we explain why, don't let a doctor just say, "Hey, I'll do a bypass. It's no problem." Right? And I don't want to do unroofing. I'll do a bypass. That happened to me. I had a doctor in New York City say, "Yeah, that's good. I just put a bypass on that. No problem." Uh, Bypass is not the first line treatment for myocardial bridges. No one's saying it is. Cleveland Clinic says it's not. Stanford says it's not. It's just not. It's not the first line treatment because again, you still are left with a bridge after you bypass it. So why would you do invasive surgery and not take out the root of the problem? It doesn't make any sense. But so you might ask, well, why would doctors recommend bypass if it wasn't the first line treatment? And the two-part answer is A, doctors do not keep up with the literature on every single heart issue that goes on. And many doctors have, like Stanford has put out like 16 or 17 papers on myocardial bridges. They're the pioneer, they're out there. Just in the last like 7 years or so, 16, 17 papers. And the percentage of cardiologists that have read those papers is probably like less than 1%. Like they just don't read all this stuff. Um, People on our site, I do. People on our site do because that's what we're there for, right? But this is a condition that not every doctor is going home every night thinking about myocardial bridges. So what they're doing is they're basically saying if they offer you a bypass, instead of I do the bypass, no problem. They're basically just doing the easy thing for them, right? These cardio surgeons, they do bypasses like in their sleep. They do bypasses all the time. It's such a common operation, and they just want to keep it simple for themselves. You know, that's not it's a non-reason to do that surgery. It's not a good reason just to make their life easy. Okay, they don't understand the problem. The problem is why not to do a bypass is because, again, as Dr. Pettersson said, as Dr. Schnitger has said, as the entire Stanford team has said, in all their studies, they pointed this out, that bypasses very often fail. They very often fail. And by fail, it means that the new artery that's put in there, so you have your main artery where your bridge is, let's say the LAD artery here, then there's a myocardial bridge and a section in the middle like this. It's getting squashed, garden hose. And then you've got this, they'll take a piece of a different artery, usually the lima, okay, is a part of a different part of your body. They take a section of that artery and they'll graft that in as a side route, like to literally bypass this new piece of an artery from another part of your body. They'll sew that on, right? They'll graft it on so it's a side route around bypassing your bridge. What's the problem? Well, that can work normally for just a typical plaque or something like that, but for bridges, it doesn't work very well. Okay, because there's what they usually say is there's competitive flow. Um, Competitive flow means that there's still blood running through the original artery that has a bridge on it. It's still got blood running through there. It's not like it's 90% clogged with plaque, like if it's a typical bypass surgery, like that artery's shot, like nothing's going through there. It's not necessarily like that. You still can have blood going through there. It's just like maybe when your heart rate gets too high, it gets real cut off or something like that. So that blood flow is going to compete with the blood that's supposed to be going through the new bypass artery. And Dr. Pettersson, the Cleveland Clinic surgeon, says in the video also that when you put a bypass artery in there, the blood flow through there needs to be promoted. Like it needs to be like especially going that way to keep that artery open. Right? You can't just put an artery in and let it sit there with no blood. It's got to have blood going through it to keep the artery sustained, to keep it like working and functioning. Right? That new bypass artery. But if you got this competitive flow, then a lot of the blood's going to go the other way through the original artery. And what happens is, like I said, oftentimes the bypass artery will seal up and shrivel. And this has happened to people on our site, multiple people, where they came back years later and they did a scan and it turns out that the bypass artery was like not getting flow through it. There's zero flow practically going through there, and it had shriveled up because, again, the blood flow through there was not being promoted. It was competing. The other artery was competing with it and sort of winning. It was taking all the blood. okay, through the original bridged artery. So if you do a bypass, a standalone, just a bypass by itself, you're left with the possibility of a shriveled up artery with no blood going through it, and then you still have the myocardial bridge that you started with in the first place. So um, the only real time to do a bypass is two situations. One, if it's your only last resort, you for some reason you cannot do a unroofing. There's something physically impossible about that. The second is if you do unroofing, sometimes they also add a bypass, like a second option. That's okay. That's actually okay if you do unroofing and you add a bypass, because even if it doesn't work, you still have the main one, right? So it's like just a backup or something like that. So it's okay to do unroofing plus bypass, but you don't want to. Your first option is not ever bypass alone. Don't do that, okay? Because you're still left with the bridge, and if that bypass fails, what happens? You have no blood flow to your heart. So what happened with several patients on our site is they had a bypass, and then, like I said, they did the scan. They were having lots of heart problems 5 years later. It's supposed to solve their problem, and it didn't. Came back, they saw on the scans hardly any blood flow was going through that bypass artery, and they had to have a second open heart surgery. This is multiple people on our site. They had to come back 5 years later, 7 years later, have a second open heart surgery, this time to unroof their artery that was never unroofed the first time. So if they just done it right the first time, if they just done the unroofing the first time, they wouldn't have had to go back and have a second open heart. Okay, so do yourself a favor. Don't listen to the doctor that just wants to do what's easy for them. Just do a bypass just because it's simple for them. That doesn't make any sense. That's not the first line treatment. Say, no, I want unroofing. And if they refuse that and go somewhere else, well, they're going to do the unroofing properly. And again, if it's the time when you would add the bypass to the unroofing would be when you have your main artery with the bridge on it, the LAD artery, has a lot of plaque in it. So it's not just the bridge that's the problem, but you also have a lot of that plaque before, like 60% plaque or something, or 70%, 80%. Then in those cases, then you would do unroofing plus bypass. You get the best of both worlds. But standalone bypass, not first line treatment. Okay, and stent, not only not first line treatment, but never a good idea because it could literally kill you. Whether it's because of the breaking of the stent or whether it's because of the increased proclivity of the artery to dissect and rupture, and the wearing away of that artery on it. Just not doesn't bode well for the future of that artery. Okay, so that's a look at stents and bypasses. Again, the main first line treatment is always unroofing. You can find lots more about this. This is all written up on our website, which is myocardialbridge.net. And we have a Facebook site. It's the Facebook Myocardial Bridge Support Group. We have almost, right now, 2,000 people on the site. It's always growing. And if you get on there, you see lots of stories of people. If you have a myocardial bridge, there's people just like you. So I hope to see you there.